The courtroom was tense, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. A 12-year-old boy stood at the witness stand, holding a piece of paper with shaking hands. He looked at the judge, then at his mother, and then began to read the text message that had changed everything. One sentence, 6 words. "You get the kid." When he finished, there wasn't a single dry eye in the courtroom. And one man, his father, refused to look up. This is not just a custody battle. It's a story of betrayal, manipulation, and a child caught in a web of deceit. What started as a divorce spiraled into a bitter courtroom showdown, with allegations flying and truths buried beneath carefully crafted lies. But in the end, it wasn't the lawyers or the parents who exposed the truth. It was the boy himself, and a single message that would tear through the courtroom like a bolt of lightning. At first glance, Amanda and Eric Carrington had what everyone considered a picture-perfect marriage. A cozy house in the suburbs, respectable careers. Amanda worked as a pediatric nurse, Eric was a financial consultant, and a 12-year-old son, Daniel, who was always smiling and polite. Neighbors often remarked how lucky they were, how together they seemed. But inside the Carrington home, behind the curated photos and polite smiles, something darker brewed. The unraveling didn't happen overnight. It began with subtle shifts, dismissive glances, unexplained absences, passive-aggressive comments that Amanda initially brushed off as stress. Eric became cold, emotionally distant, and unpredictably temperamental. One moment he'd praise Amanda's work ethic, and the next he'd accuse her of neglecting the family. He monitored her phone calls, questioned her time at work, and began planting quiet seeds of self-doubt. Daniel witnessed more than he let on. He'd hear the muffled arguments behind his bedroom wall, see the stiffness in his mother's smile when she served dinner, and sense the tension that filled the air like static. He learned to navigate silence, to tiptoe emotionally. Amanda, on the other hand, kept trying, for Daniel's sake. She convinced herself things would get better, that maybe Eric just needed time, but the kindness that once glued them together had vanished. Then came the moment that snapped the illusion. One evening, Amanda came home early from her shift to find Eric yelling at Daniel for forgetting to complete a math assignment. It wasn't the words that shook her, it was the tone. The same cold, slicing tone she had grown used to. Daniel stood frozen, tears in his eyes, not because he feared punishment, but because the anger felt disproportionate, almost rehearsed. Amanda stepped in, and for the first time in front of their son, Eric shouted back at her with vitriol. That night, Amanda made a decision. She filed for divorce. Eric's reaction was coldly strategic. Within days, he had secured a lawyer and filed a counter-motion demanding primary custody of Daniel. Not joint custody, primary. The message was clear. He wasn't going to let her win. What had begun as a plea for peace quickly evolved into a war zone of legal documents, court appearances, and character attacks. In his filings, Eric painted Amanda as unstable and overly emotional, alleging she had trouble balancing work and home life, and that her long nursing shifts left Daniel unattended and vulnerable. He cited fabricated concerns about her mental health and exaggerated stories from years past, like the one time she forgot to pick Daniel up from soccer practice, which he now framed as evidence of chronic negligence. Amanda, blindsided, realized she was no longer dealing with the man she had married. She was dealing with someone intent on erasing her from their child's life. Her attorney advised her to document everything: texts, schedules, school reports, any evidence that countered Eric's narrative. Still, Eric was cunning. He never left outright proof of malice, just whispers of implication. Daniel became the silent center of the storm. At first, Eric pretended everything was normal during his parenting time. Ice cream trips, movie nights, promises of vacations. But beneath the surface, he began subtly turning Daniel against Amanda. Comments like, "I'm sorry your mom is always so tired," or "I wish I could be with you full time, but the court doesn't let me," became routine. He painted Amanda as the reason for the family's fragmentation. Daniel, confused and caught in the middle, began withdrawing from both parents. His grades dipped, he grew quiet, and he started missing school assignments. A therapist later called it emotional triangulation. But in that moment, Amanda only saw her son slipping away. One day, Daniel came back from a weekend with Eric and quietly asked his mother, "Do you want me, or do you just want to win?" The question cut deeper than any court allegation. Amanda realized the cost of this war wasn't just legal fees or emotional exhaustion. It was her son's sense of security. To make matters worse, Eric's public persona never cracked. He charmed the court evaluator, brought in glowing references from coworkers, and even had character witnesses, including his new girlfriend, who claimed to have seen how Amanda treated Daniel when no one else was around. Amanda was never charged with anything, and there were no formal findings of neglect or abuse. But doubt, once introduced in a custody case, is hard to erase. The first court hearing left Amanda shaken. She felt like a defendant, not a mother. Her lawyer was competent but cautious, pushing for joint custody as a compromise. Amanda nodded, suppressing the urge to scream. Why should she have to compromise with a man who saw their child as a trophy? Why did the truth feel so buried? But just when she thought it couldn't get worse, Daniel's old iPad synced with a cloud backup of Eric's phone. And that's when Amanda found the message. The message wasn't hidden in a secret folder. It wasn't encrypted or password protected. It wasn't even deleted. It was just sitting there, in a synced cloud backup on Daniel's old iPad. Amanda found it by accident while searching for a school project file. Daniel had used the iPad at his dad's place during the summer, and somehow, through an automatic sync, Eric's messages had backed up onto it. At first, Amanda dismissed the notifications. Most of it was junk, spam, reminders, a few dry text exchanges with colleagues. Then she saw the thread. It was from Eric to a contact saved as Tiff Kissmark. The woman Amanda had suspected Eric had been seeing even before the divorce papers were served. She opened the conversation. Scrolling back through weeks of texts felt like peeling the skin off a wound. Painful, but impossible to stop. Most of the messages were flirty, juvenile. The kind of thing that felt embarrassing to read from someone who had once sat across from her at parent-teacher meetings. But one message stood out like a flare in the dark. "Eric, you get the kid. Make her crack. She'll beg. Trust me." Amanda froze. Her heart pounded. Her hands trembled. She reread the message again and again, making sure she hadn't misunderstood. But there it was. Short, brutal, intentional. A calculated strategy, not a parental concern. It wasn't about Daniel's well-being. It was about using him to break her. She took screenshots. Every message, every timestamp. She copied the backup data to an external drive and called her lawyer. When she sent the files, there was a long silence on the other end of the call before her attorney finally said, "This changes everything." But nothing in court is ever that simple. Her lawyer cautioned her that although the messages were damning, they had to be authenticated and introduced properly. Worse, using data synced from Daniel's device. Technically Eric's during the time of the sync could raise questions about digital privacy. Still, the content was too significant to ignore. The legal team moved fast to subpoena Eric's phone records, hoping to corroborate the message chain directly from the source. Meanwhile, Amanda couldn't unsee it. That one sentence had opened the door to everything she had suspected, but could never prove. Eric wasn't trying to win custody out of love for their son. He was trying to win it as a means of punishment. This wasn't about parenting. It was about power. More chillingly, the conversation continued. "Tiff Kissmark, don't you think that's cruel? Eric, It's leverage. She'll fold. She always does. Tiff kiss mark. And what about Daniel? Eric? He'll be fine. He'll get over it. Just stick to the script. The script. Amanda read the word like a poison. Everything started clicking into place. The emotional manipulation, the sudden charm offensive during court evaluations, the scripted support from Eric's girlfriend. He had engineered every step of this, including the image he projected to the court. Stable, concerned, mature. A mask worn so tightly it had almost fooled everyone. Amanda's lawyer filed an emergency motion to introduce the messages, but the court required time to review the evidence and its admissibility. The hearing was delayed, just long enough for Amanda to notice another change. Daniel was retreating. He grew quieter after visits with Eric. He no longer asked questions about the case. He started parroting things Eric had said, almost word for word. Mom just wants to win. You're always sad. And once heartbreakingly, maybe I'd be better off with Dad. Amanda didn't get angry. She didn't scold him. She just held him and cried when he fell asleep. The messages had confirmed what she feared, that Eric had been manipulating their son too. When she finally told her lawyer what was happening, the team agreed. If Daniel had seen or heard anything directly, and if he was willing, he might become a key witness. Not in the traditional sense, but in a way that revealed the emotional atmosphere around him. The idea was uncomfortable. Amanda's first instinct was to say no. She didn't want her child anywhere near that courtroom. But Daniel was already in the middle of it. Not by choice, but by design. The tipping point came one night when Daniel approached Amanda quietly in the kitchen. He had been staring at the iPad she had moved to the counter, now powered off. "Is that Dad's?" he asked. Amanda hesitated. "Sort of," she replied carefully. Daniel nodded. Then, in a small voice, "I saw that message. The one about me." Amanda froze. "Daniel," he looked at her, eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. "I want to tell the judge. He shouldn't be allowed to do this." Amanda knelt beside him, trying to find the right words. But there were none. Daniel had already made a choice, the kind no child should have to make. That night, Amanda sent her lawyer one final text. "Daniel wants to testify." Amanda couldn't sleep the night Daniel said he wanted to testify. Her son's soft, determined voice echoed in her mind. He shouldn't be allowed to do this. It was a sentence number 12-year-old should ever have to say about their own father. Yet there was a calm conviction behind his words that Amanda had never seen before. Daniel wasn't angry. He wasn't crying. He wasn't trying to be brave. He already was. The next morning, Amanda met with her attorney and a child advocate assigned to the case. Neither was enthusiastic about putting a child on the stand. Family court judges are hesitant to allow minors to testify unless it's absolutely necessary. And even then, it's typically done privately in chambers. But this wasn't a typical case. Daniel wasn't just a child caught in the middle. He was the center of a manipulation campaign. And he had seen the evidence with his own eyes. The court appointed a child psychologist to speak with Daniel and evaluate his mental and emotional state. Amanda waited in the hallway outside the office for nearly an hour, wringing her hands, her heart a constant drumbeat of guilt and fear. Was she doing the right thing? Was she letting her son walk into a storm he should have been protected from? But when Daniel came out of the room, he wasn't shaken. He wasn't scared. He looked Amanda in the eye and said, "I told her everything." In the psychologist's report, Daniel was described as articulate, emotionally mature for his age, and clearly aware of the family dynamics in a way that suggests long-term exposure to psychological tension. The therapist recommended that, under controlled conditions, Daniel be allowed to present what he knew, not as a tool for one side or another, but to protect his right to be heard. The judge reviewed the request and approved it, but with strict parameters. Daniel would testify in a closed courtroom, only in the presence of legal counsel, the parents, and the judge. No media, no jury, no public viewing. Amanda felt some relief. She had been dreading the thought of her son facing a crowd. This way, at least, he would be protected from the spectacle. Eric objected immediately. Through his lawyer, he claimed that Daniel was being coached, that Amanda was using him as a pawn, and that the child was confused and overwhelmed. But when the court questioned the psychologist, she responded firmly, "Daniel is not confused. He is clear-eyed and resolute. What's overwhelming him is the truth, not the telling of it, but the living with it." The date was set. Amanda barely spoke the night before. She made Daniel his favorite dinner, spaghetti with garlic bread, and tried to keep the atmosphere light. Daniel, however, was composed. Too composed. It broke Amanda's heart. He had always been a cheerful, curious boy. But tonight, he was quiet, focused. Before bed, he turned to her and asked, "Will it help?" Amanda's voice cracked. "Yes, baby. It will help a lot." Daniel nodded once, then went to his room. The next day, the courtroom was unusually still. The usual legal hustle had quieted. Even the clerks seemed subdued. Daniel entered in a navy sweater and khaki pants, gripping a folded piece of paper in his right hand. Amanda sat behind him, her fingers curled into fists in her lap, willing herself not to cry. The judge greeted Daniel gently, explaining that he didn't need to be afraid, and that the court was only interested in hearing what he wanted to say. Daniel nodded politely. Then he asked if he could read something he had written. The judge agreed. Daniel unfolded the paper. The silence in the room thickened. "My name is Daniel Carrington. I'm 12. I used to think both my parents loved me the same, but now I don't know. My mom takes care of me when I'm sick. She comes to my games even when she's tired. She listens to me even when I don't talk much. My dad, he's different. He tells me bad things about my mom when she's not around. He says I'll be happier with him, but then he leaves me alone to go out. Sometimes I hear him talking on the phone. He said one time, 'You get the kid, make her crack, she'll beg.' I didn't know what that meant until I saw it on the iPad. That's what he really wrote. I don't want to be a prize. I'm not a thing. I'm a person. I want to live with my mom. That's all." When he finished, the room was absolutely still. Amanda had tears running down her cheeks. Even Eric, who had sat stone-faced during most of the hearing, was now pale, his lips pressed tightly together, his fists clenched. He avoided eye contact with his son. The judge sat motionless for a few long seconds before nodding slowly. Daniel folded the paper again and handed it to the bailiff. "I'm done," he said. He stepped down from the witness stand and walked back to Amanda, who opened her arms without a word. He leaned into her and didn't let go. Eric's attorney tried to recover with legal objections, but the momentum had shifted. The courtroom no longer revolved around a bitter custody fight. It revolved around a boy who had simply told the truth. And the truth had changed everything. The courtroom didn't return to normal after Daniel's testimony. It couldn't. What had once been a contested custody case full of typical back and forth, affidavits, scheduled visitations, character statements, now carried a far heavier weight. Daniel's quiet, unwavering words echoed far beyond the four walls of that courtroom. The judge didn't call for recess immediately. Instead, there was a moment of collective stillness, as if everyone present, from the stenographer to the opposing counsel, had just realized they'd been sitting in the same room as something undeniably true. Amanda's lawyer capitalized on the shift. The next morning, they filed a formal motion to admit the full backup logs from Eric's text messages into evidence. The court granted a short evidentiary hearing to authenticate them, a mere formality after Eric's voice had already betrayed him through his own son. The judge granted Amanda the floor. Her attorney stood, calm but resolute, and addressed the court. Your Honor, we intend to show that this custody battle is not being waged in the best interest of the child, but rather as a deliberate and strategic emotional manipulation campaign by Mr. Carrington, using his son not as a co-parent would, but as a weapon. A hush fell as the screen lit up with the digital transcripts. The text messages Amanda had once found on that forgotten iPad were now front and center, blown up for all to see. Each bubble a small betrayal. Eric Carrington. To Tiff kiss Mark, you get the kid. Make her crack. She'll beg. Trust me. Tiff kiss Mark. This doesn't feel right. What about Daniel? Eric. He's tough. He'll be fine. Once Amanda's out of the way, it'll settle. Amanda didn't look at Eric during the presentation. She didn't need to. The courtroom's attention shifted like a tide pulling away from a dying shore. Even the judge leaned forward now, hands steepled, his gaze locked on Eric with increasing intensity. Amanda's attorney read several more texts aloud, the ones about leveraging the school reports, timing custody handovers to disrupt Amanda's nursing shifts, and, perhaps most devastatingly, a message that read, Eric, I told him she's sick. Just enough for him to doubt her. He'll pick me in the end. A gasp rang out from someone in the gallery. It was quiet, but unmistakable. A court officer quickly motioned for silence. Amanda didn't recognize the woman, probably a court observer or intern, but the reaction spoke to a deeper truth. This wasn't just strategic misbehavior. It was cruelty. Cold, premeditated cruelty. Eric's attorney rose slowly, clearly rattled. She tried to mount a defense, arguing that the texts lacked full context, that venting to a romantic partner during a custody battle, while inappropriate, didn't prove malicious intent. She suggested Amanda could have fabricated the messages, until the phone company records confirmed that every word had been sent from Eric's number, on the dates and times Amanda documented. The judge interrupted. Counsel, the court has confirmed authenticity. Please proceed accordingly. Eric's composure began to fray. He tugged at his collar, tapped his foot, avoided looking at anyone directly. Then, breaking protocol, he spoke up. Not to the judge, but to Amanda. I didn't mean for it to get this far, he said, voice cracking. It was just words. I was angry. Amanda sat frozen. Not with fear, not with sadness. With clarity. She realized in that moment that this man, once her husband, had never fully seen their son as a person. To Eric, Daniel had been leverage, a possession, a pawn. His remorse now wasn't for what he had done. It was for being caught. The judge turned to Eric with a measured glare. You will refrain from speaking directly to the petitioner unless instructed. And let me be clear, your conduct is now under judicial scrutiny for more than just poor parenting. Then came the unexpected. The child psychologist, who had previously met with Daniel, requested to present an addendum to her original report. The judge allowed it. She walked to the stand with composed authority and said, After reviewing Daniel's testimony and the now confirmed messages, I believe the child has been subjected to a sustained pattern of coercive psychological manipulation. This is known clinically as parental alienation. In my professional opinion, Mr. Carrington's behavior has done lasting harm, not only to the child's relationship with both parents, but to the child's ability to process trust and emotional safety in the future. She paused, and yet, Daniel still wanted to speak up. He did not let fear stop him. That resilience is rare, and it must be protected. Eric sat slumped in his chair, his silence no longer a form of control, but evidence of collapse. Amanda looked at him once, just once, and for the first time in years, there was no fear in her eyes, only finality. What had started as a standard custody hearing had transformed into something far more serious, a full exposure of motive, intent, and damage. The court wasn't just weighing who deserved custody anymore. It was now grappling with a deeper question. What do we do when a parent weaponizes love? The answer, Amanda knew, was coming, and it would arrive in the form of a verdict. The final day of testimony arrived with a kind of quiet tension that felt like a held breath. Amanda sat in the courtroom, her palms resting on her skirt, her fingers twitching just slightly. All eyes weren't just on the attorneys or the judge anymore. They were on her, not as a grieving ex-wife, not as a pawn in Eric's manipulation, but as a mother who had weathered a storm and still stood. Amanda Carrington was called to the stand. As she rose and walked past Eric, she didn't glance at him. She no longer needed to. The gravity of what he had done was now carried by everyone in the room. And finally, it wasn't her burden alone. Amanda took the oath. Her voice was steady, her spine straight. She had been waiting for this moment. Not to destroy Eric, but to bring light into every shadow he had created. Her attorney began with simple questions. Her role as a nurse, her work schedule, her efforts to maintain a consistent environment for Daniel, the sleepless nights, the counseling sessions, the missed promotions and holidays sacrificed just to keep things normal for her son. But then came the harder questions. Did you ever tell Daniel negative things about his father? No, Amanda answered immediately. I protected him from the truth for as long as I could. I thought shielding him was the right thing. And when did that change? Amanda paused. The night I saw the message, "You get the kid. Make her crack." After that, I realized I wasn't protecting Daniel. I was abandoning him to someone who saw him as a weapon. A low murmur rolled through the courtroom. Amanda didn't flinch. The attorney continued. Why didn't you come forward sooner with the messages? Amanda's voice lowered, but it never wavered. Because I was afraid no one would believe me. Eric is smart. He's charming. He knows how to say the right things. But I've lived with what's behind the mask. And I had to be sure, absolutely sure, before I brought our son into this. And do you believe Eric manipulated your child? Amanda looked straight at the judge. Yes, I believe he planted doubts, poisoned his thoughts, and turned love into leverage. He tried to make Daniel choose not based on love, but on fear. And Daniel deserves better. Eric's attorney stood to cross-examine, clearly hoping to find a crack in Amanda's calm. But Amanda was no longer afraid of the questions. Not anymore. Mrs. Carrington, you've painted a very emotional picture. But can you honestly say you never spoke ill of Mr. Carrington to your son? Even in private moments? Amanda met her gaze. What I said privately was never for Daniel's ears. What Eric said was meant to reach him, designed to shape him. There's a difference between venting to a friend and orchestrating emotional warfare. There was a pause. The opposing counsel tried again. Isn't it true that you fought Eric on nearly every scheduling issue? Yes, Amanda said plainly. Because he used Daniel's schedule as a weapon. He'd cancel last minute. He'd no-show. He'd book vacations without asking. I fought not for control, but for Daniel's stability. The lawyer faltered. And what do you think will happen if the court grants you sole custody? Are you saying Eric should be removed from your son's life entirely? Amanda drew in a breath. This was the hardest part. No, I'm saying Eric needs to earn his place back. Slowly, under supervision, with accountability. Daniel is not a trophy to be passed around. He's a person, and no person should be raised by someone who views love as a means to win. The judge said nothing, simply taking notes. But his eyes never left Amanda. When she stepped down, she walked back to her seat, her head held high. Her attorney leaned over and whispered, "You did everything right." Eric did not take the stand. His lawyer advised against it. His credibility had already been shredded. His outburst in court, the authenticated texts, The psychologist's testimony and Daniel's statement, heartbreakingly honest, unshakably true, had left him with no defense that wouldn't collapse under cross-examination. Instead, Eric sat at the defense table in silence, his expression unreadable. Not anger, not remorse, something colder, emptier, the face of a man who realized too late that his greatest weapon, control, no longer worked. The judge announced that closing arguments would be waived. He had heard enough. He would return the next day with a ruling. Amanda left the courtroom in silence, holding Daniel's hand. For the first time in months, she felt no panic, no dread, just clarity. She had spoken the truth. Daniel had spoken his truth. And now, the court would speak its truth. The courtroom was packed for the verdict, though only those directly involved were permitted inside. No media, no public audience. Just Amanda, her attorney, the child advocate, Eric and his counsel, and the judge. Daniel, by order of the court, was not present. He had already done more than any child should ever have to. Amanda sat quietly at the petitioner's table, hands folded, eyes fixed on the judge's bench. She didn't move when Eric entered. She didn't speak. She simply waited, one breath at a time. The judge emerged from his chambers at precisely 10 a.m., robes flowing, expression unreadable. He placed the written ruling gently on the bench and took a long pause before speaking. The silence was like gravity, pressing down on everyone in the room. Then he began. This court has presided over many custody disputes. It is our duty to determine what arrangement serves the best interest of the child. Not the parents' egos, not their revenge, not their agendas. But never in my tenure have I encountered such a clear case of emotional weaponization as I have in this matter. Eric's face tightened. Amanda stayed still, unmoving. The evidence, both testimonial and digital, paints a deeply troubling picture. Mr. Carrington, you not only failed to prioritize your child's emotional well-being, you intentionally undermined it. You constructed narratives to fracture a bond between mother and son. You lied. You manipulated. You sent messages not meant to communicate, but to control. You attempted to gaslight this court, your former spouse, and most disturbingly, your own child. He leaned forward slightly, voice steady. You told a romantic partner to get the kid, as if your son were a chess piece. You said you would make her crack. You bragged about planting doubts in your child's mind, then acted shocked when that child, stronger and more decent than you realized, told the truth in this courtroom. Eric looked down. His lawyer placed a hand on his arm. He did not respond. Amanda swallowed hard but held back tears. The judge continued. Daniel Carrington's testimony was one of the clearest, most courageous statements I've heard in this courtroom. His words showed insight, emotional maturity, and pain. He knew what was being done to him. And still, he stood up here, not to take sides, but to ask that someone finally protect him. Well, this court hears him. He picked up the ruling. Effective immediately, full legal and physical custody of Daniel Carrington is awarded to the petitioner, Amanda Carrington. Supervised visitation may be granted to Mr. Carrington, contingent on his enrollment and consistent participation in parental therapy, psychological evaluation, and a comprehensive parenting course. The court will review his progress in 6 months. A muffled gasp escaped from Amanda's attorney. Amanda, however, sat still, letting the words settle like rainfall over parched ground. The dam inside her had finally broken, not with an outburst, but with peace. The judge wasn't done. This case is not simply about custody. It is about accountability. This court is not blind to the quiet kinds of abuse, the invisible strings that twist a child's love until it becomes a trap. Mr. Carrington, your actions were not only reprehensible, they were cowardly. You used your son's heart as a battlefield, and you lost. Not to Amanda, but to the truth. He paused. Let this ruling be clear. This court will not let you weaponize a child. Not today. Not ever. He banged the gavel once. Sharp. Final. Court is adjourned. Amanda didn't cry right away. It was Daniel's face that she thought of first. The way he had looked when he handed the folded paper to the judge. She would tell him what had happened, of course. Carefully. But for now, she just closed her eyes and let the silence wash over her. Not the tense, waiting kind, but the good kind. The kind that comes after justice. Eric stood and left quickly, flanked by his lawyer. No apology. No backward glance. Amanda didn't watch him go. She had no reason to. Her son was safe. And she had finally, fully won. Not because she fought harder, but because she told the truth. And the truth had spoken back.